He had money, power, and everything he wanted, until he saw something he couldn't get out of his head. A poor little girl was carrying notebooks filled with drawings of food instead of a lunch. The reason behind these drawings is heartbreaking and exposes a cruel reality. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Silence in the Anderson mansion was deafening. Richard adjusted the knot of his tie for the 5th time as he surveyed the grand hall, decorated with blue and gold balloons, colorful ribbons hanging from the crystal chandelier, and a table laden with sweets that no one had touched. The 2-tiered cake ordered from the best bakery in New York City remained untouched in the center of the table, with 2 candles shaped like the number 7 waiting to be blown out. It was 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in March, and the birthday party for the twins, Gabriel and Michael, should have been in full swing. There should have been laughter echoing through the marble hallways, children running across the manicured lawn, parents chatting about trivialities while watching their kids play. But the 30 chairs arranged carefully around the tables remained empty, a cruel reminder that all the money in the world can't buy what truly matters. Richard ran a hand through his prematurely graying hair and checked his phone once more. No cancellation texts, no calls explaining delays, just the digital void that mirrored the physical emptiness of the party. He had sent invitations to every child, from the private school where the boys studied, offered private car service for anyone who needed it, promised expensive party favors, and even suggested that the parents stay for a cocktail hour. None of it had mattered. In the corner of the hall, Michael sat in an armchair far too large for his slender 7-year-old body, staring intently at his own hands clasped in his lap. His dark brown hair fell over his eyes, a curtain he had learned to use to hide from the world. Since the accident 2 years ago, Michael had become a shadow of himself, speaking, only when necessary, playing alone, avoiding any situation that might draw attention. Across the room, Gabriel was in his navy blue wheelchair, spinning the wheels rhythmically as he watched the balloons sway gently in the breeze coming through the open glass doors to the garden. His eyes, identical to his brother's, shone with a mixture of fading hope and a sadness no child should ever have to carry. He had spent the entire morning asking when his friends would arrive, adjusting the position of the toys he wanted to show off, practicing the jokes he had memorized, especially for the occasion. Richard approached his sons, feeling the weight of each step on the cold marble floor. Guilt had been a constant companion since that fateful January afternoon 2 years ago, when he decided to take the boys fishing at the family's lake house in the Catskills. It was supposed to be a moment of connection, a break from the endless meetings and urgent calls that consumed his life. But a distraction of a few seconds, a phone that rang at the wrong moment, and everything changed forever. The boat had capsized when Gabriel tried to reach for a fishing rod that had fallen into the water. The current swept him against submerged rocks, and by the time Richard managed to pull him from the water, the damage was done. His spinal cord was injured, and along with the mobility in Gabriel's legs, Michael's innocence was also lost in those murky waters. The boy had witnessed everything, screamed for help, seen his brother groaning in pain, and had since carried a heavy silence as if he were somehow responsible for not being able to save Gabriel. "Maybe someone will still show up," Richard murmured, more to himself than to the boys, checking the gold watch on his wrist again. It was 4:15. The party had started at 2, and the last optimistic window for late arrivals had long since passed. Gabriel stopped spinning the wheels and looked at his father with those eyes that carried a maturity forced by circumstance. "Dad, I don't think anyone's coming." The sentence hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Not because the information was new, he had already painfully accepted it, but because of the resigned acceptance in his 7-year-old son's voice. A child shouldn't talk about social rejection with such normalcy, as if it were expected and inevitable. Michael looked up for the first time in hours and whispered, "Is it because people are scared of us?" The question echoed through the silent hall like a muffled cry for help. Richard felt his throat tighten and had to sit in the nearest chair to keep from stumbling. How do you explain to 2 children that the world can be cruel, that people avoid what they don't understand, that difference scares them more than it should? How do you tell them that he himself had contributed to this isolation? protecting them so much that he ended up depriving them of normal social experiences. In the 2 years since the accident, Richard had become obsessed with providing his sons with everything money could buy. Renowned physical therapists, state-of-the-art equipment, adaptive toys, private tutors, specialized psychologists. He had transformed the west wing of the mansion into a veritable rehabilitation clinic, with ramps, support bars, non-slip flooring, and every technological device that could assist Gabriel's mobility. But amidst all this medical and therapeutic structure, he had forgotten something fundamental, allowing them to simply be kids. The birthday parties of previous years had been cancelled. Richard always found excuses. Gabriel was. In a delicate phase of physical therapy, Michael was having difficulties at school. It was better to wait until they were better adjusted. The truth was that he himself couldn't bear the idea of seeing his sons being watched with pity or morbid curiosity by their peers and parents. He preferred to protect them from the judgment of others, even if it meant depriving them of important moments of their childhoods. But this year, he had decided it was time. The boys were more emotionally stable, according to the psychologist. Gabriel had adapted well to the wheelchair and could move around the house and school independently. Michael had started talking a little more during family therapy sessions. It seemed like the right time to reintegrate them socially. Richard had planned everything down to the smallest detail. He hired a company specializing in children's parties, chose activities that would naturally include Gabriel, like painting, board games, and a small magic show. He had even hired a monitor specialized in inclusive recreation who had been waiting in the kitchen for 2 hours, pretending to be busy organizing materials that would not be used. The decor had been designed to create a cheerful atmosphere without being too childish, respecting the premature maturity that circumstances had imposed on the boys. There was a special area in the garden with low tables so Gabriel could participate comfortably, and a reserved space for Michael to retreat to if he felt socially overwhelmed, as often happened in environments with many people. But what was the point of all this meticulous preparation if there was no one to appreciate it? Richard looked at his sons again and noticed that Gabriel had started to dismantle one of the crepe paper decorations, rolling and unrolling the colorful strips with mechanical movements that betrayed his anxiety. Michael had gone back to looking at his own hands, biting his lower lip compulsively. The 45-year-old businessman, accustomed to commanding meetings with hundreds of millions at stake, felt completely powerless in the face of his son's silent sadness. His pharmaceutical company, Anderson Pharma, was one of the largest in the country, developing life-saving drugs and generating profits that allowed for a life of unimaginable comfort for most people. But all this professional success seemed insignificant when confronted with his inability to provide something as simple as a happy birthday party for his own children. The sound of the front doorbell cut through the silence like a ray of hope. The three of them turned simultaneously toward the entrance hall, and for a moment, Gabriel's eyes lit up with the possibility that someone, anyone, had decided to show up. Richard stood up quickly, straightening his clothes and trying to rearrange his expression to welcome whoever it was with enthusiasm. The footsteps of Mrs. Carmen, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for over a decade, echoed down the marble corridor. She appeared at the entrance of the hall with a confused expression on her tired, dark-skinned face, her grey hair tied in its usual impeccable bun. Richard knew her well enough to know that something unusual was happening. Mrs. Carmen was not a person easily flustered. "Mr. Anderson," she said, with the soft southern accent she'd kept after 40 years in New York, "there's a little girl at the door. I don't quite know how to explain it, but she says she's here for the party." Richard frowned. There was no girl on the guest list he didn't know, and certainly no child would come alone to a party in Greenwich. "A girl? What do you mean? Are her parents with her?" Mrs. Carmen shook her head slowly, as if still processing the situation. "She's alone, sir. Must be about 8 years old, very thin, with clothes that are, well, different from what we usually see around here. But there's something in her eyes." She paused, searching for the right words. "A determination that made me feel like I couldn't just send her away." Gabriel had completely stopped fidgeting with the decorations and was now gripping the wheels of his chair tightly, as if preparing to move quickly. Michael had lifted his head completely and, was looking directly at Mrs. Carman, something that rarely happened when adults were talking. "Did she give you her name?" Richard asked, still trying to process the situation. "Luna Miller. And when I asked if she was sure this was the right place, she looked me straight in the eye and said, 'Is this where there are two kids who are sad on their birthday?'" The silence that followed was different from the oppressive silence that had dominated the afternoon. It was a silence charged with possibility, with expectation, with something none of the three could name but all could feel. Richard looked at his sons and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, genuine curiosity on both their faces. Gabriel had moved a few inches forward in his chair, as if ready to go to the door himself. Michael had gotten up from the armchair and taken 2 steps toward the hall, more spontaneous movement than he had shown all day. Richard's analytical mind, trained by years of complex negotiations and strategic decisions, tried to process all the variables of the situation. An unknown child without adult supervision in one of the safest and most exclusive areas of New York. How had she gotten past the community's security? Why was she alone? What was her real motivation for being there? But when he looked at Gabriel and Michael again, all those rational considerations suddenly seemed less important. For the first time in 2 years, there was real hope in his son's eyes. Richard remained motionless for long seconds, watching the growing expectation on his sons' faces. The decision seemed simple on the surface: let a child into a children's party. But the implications were too complex for his mind, accustomed to calculating risks and consequences. Who was this girl? How had she gotten here? And why was her presence already causing more of a reaction in the twins than 2 years of specialized therapy? "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Carman insisted, waiting for an answer while holding the door ajar. "Dad," Gabriel whispered, his voice carrying an urgency Richard rarely heard. "Please." The word echoed through the hall like a plea. Michael had moved even closer, positioning himself next to his brother's chair in a silent show of solidarity. It was the first time in months that the two were physically close, without anyone suggesting or arranging the moment. Richard closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of another decision that could profoundly impact his sons' lives. For the past 2 years, every choice had been mediated by experts. Which school would be best for children with special needs? Which psychologist would be most suitable for childhood trauma? Which physical therapist would achieve the best results? But in this moment, there was no instruction manual or technical report to consult. "Bring her in," he finally decided, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Mrs. Carman nodded and disappeared down the corridor. The silence that followed was charged with tension, not the desperate tension of the last few minutes, but something different, an energy that none of the three could fully identify. Gabriel began to smooth his hair with nervous hands, a gesture he had developed when he felt anxious but hopeful at the same time. Michael straightened the blue polo shirt that Mrs. Carman had specially ironed for the occasion, as if preparing for something important. The footsteps returned down the corridor, but now there was a different rhythm. Mrs. Carman's determined walk accompanied by lighter, quicker steps. When the 2 figures appeared at the entrance of the hall, Richard felt his stomach clench. Luna Miller was exactly as Mrs. Carman had described, but seeing her in person was different from any expectation he might have formed. Her black hair was tied in a simple ponytail, with a few loose strands framing a small but expressive face. Her clothes, a faded pink t-shirt and a denim skirt that had seen better days, contrasted sharply with the luxurious surroundings of the mansion. But the girl seemed completely at ease with this difference. But it was her eyes that impacted Richard the most, dark brown eyes that observed everything with an intense curiosity, without a trace of intimidation or shyness. She looked directly at Gabriel in his wheelchair, then at Michael beside him, and her face lit up with a genuine smile that seemed to come from a deep place of natural joy. "Hi," she said simply, addressing the twins directly as if they were old friends. "I'm Luna. Which one of you is having a birthday today?" The question caught everyone by surprise. There was no awkwardness, no looks of pity or morbid curiosity. She had simply asked the question any child would ask upon arriving at a birthday party. "Both of us." Gabriel replied, his voice coming out clearer than it had all day. "We're twins." Luna clapped her hands once, as if that were the most wonderful thing she had heard in a long time. "Twins! That's so cool. Do you do everything together?" Michael took a step forward, surprising everyone. "Not everything. Gabriel likes to draw more, and I like puzzles more." "Oh, so you're twins, but you're different, like—" She paused thoughtfully. "Like two flowers that grew on the same plant but have different colors." The comparison was so unexpected and poetic, coming from an 8-year-old, that Richard found himself watching her with renewed interest. There was something in the way she spoke, a natural ability to make connections and analogies that was not common in children her age. "How did you know there was a party here?" Richard asked, finally joining the conversation. Luna turned to him for the first time, and Richard was surprised to see that there was no trace of nervousness in her behavior when speaking to an unknown adult. "I saw the balloons from the street," she explained simply. "And I thought, wow, someone's having a birthday, but it doesn't sound like a very loud party. So I got curious. And you came all this way by yourself?" Richard's voice carried genuine concern. "Where are your parents?" "My mum's at work. She cleans offices in the city on weekends. My dad—" Luna hesitated for the first time since she arrived. "He doesn't live with us." The simple explanation carried much more weight than the words indicated. Richard recognized in her tone the same forced maturity he saw in his own sons, but expressed differently. While Gabriel and Michael had retreated in the face of difficulties, Luna seemed to have developed an almost reckless courage. "But you shouldn't be walking around Greenwich by yourself," Richard continued, his mind still trying to process how a child had managed to get there. "I didn't walk from far," Luna laughed. "I live nearby, just across the highway. My mom sometimes cleans a house here in the community. I know the way." That information made more sense. There were smaller residential communities on the other side of the interstate that bordered Greenwich, where many of the people who worked in the area lived. Still, the fact that a child had managed to get past the community's security alone was concerning. "Can I see the cake?" Luna asked, completely changing the subject and turning to the twins. "It looks beautiful from here." Gabriel glanced at his father for a fraction of a second, as if asking for permission, before wheeling his chair toward the table. "Come on, I'll show you. It has 2 tiers and our names are written in chocolate." Luna walked beside the wheelchair, naturally adjusting her pace to Gabriel's. When they reached the table, she knelt down to be at his height and examined the cake with genuine admiration. "It's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen," she declared with absolute sincerity. "And look, it has little toy designs on the side. Whoever made this must be really talented." Richard watched the scene with fascination. Luna had shown no particular reaction to the fact that Gabriel was in a wheelchair. There were no prolonged stares, no invasive questions or that exaggerated kindness that most adults showed when interacting with his son. She simply treated him like any other child. Michael hesitantly approached the group, and Luna immediately included him in the conversation. "And you, Michael, what's your favorite part of the cake?" "I think it's the little designs," he murmured, still speaking softly but actively participating for the first time in hours. "Then let's look at all of them up close," Luna suggested. "I bet each one tells a different story." And just like that, without ceremony or planning, the 3 of them began to circle the table, with Luna inventing elaborate stories for each decoration. The little sugar soldier became a guardian of lost treasures. The marzipan horses became magical racers that carried messages between distant kingdoms. The edible flowers transformed into portals to enchanted gardens. Richard remained a few feet away, watching this transformation, with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. In 15 minutes, Luna had accomplished what 2 years of therapy had not, making Gabriel laugh spontaneously and Michael speak without being pressured. But along with the relief, an uncomfortable feeling grew in his chest. Why could a strange child connect with his son so easily when he himself often felt like a visitor in their lives? What did Luna have that he couldn't offer, even with all the resources in the world at his disposal? "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Carman called discreetly, approaching him. "The girl, she seems special, doesn't she? There's something different about her." "Yes," he agreed. unable to articulate exactly what that something different was. But it also worries me. How does an 8-year-old connect with people so easily? Where did she learn that? Maybe, Mrs. Carmen suggested with the wisdom that came from decades of raising her own children, she learned because she had to. Sometimes children who go through hardships develop a special sensitivity to recognize when other people are suffering. The observation hit Richard like a painful revelation. Luna had identified that Gabriel and Michael were sad and had chosen to do something about it. Meanwhile, the adults in their world, including himself, had spent 2 years trying to fix what was broken without managing to simply make them happy. "Dad!" Gabriel called, his voice carrying an excitement Richard hadn't heard in ages. "Luna wants to know if she can sing Happy Birthday to us." Richard looked at Luna, who was watching expectantly, awaiting his response. There was something in her expression that suggested singing Happy Birthday wasn't just a party formality, but something she genuinely wanted to do for the boys. "Of course," he replied, feeling as if he were entering completely unknown territory. "But we don't have many people to sing." "No problem," Luna interrupted cheerfully. "I'll sing really loud, and Mrs. Carmen can sing too, right?" Mrs. Carmen smiled for the first time that day. "Of course I can, honey. And you can sing too," Luna added, looking directly at Richard with a confidence that left no room for refusal. Richard found himself agreeing, even though he felt completely unprepared for this moment of spontaneity. He had planned a formal cake-cutting ceremony with a professional photographer and a carefully choreographed moment. But this was different. Luna began to sing in a clear, in-tune voice, and the others joined in. Michael sang louder than he had done anything in recent months. Gabriel clapped along to the rhythm. Mrs. Carmen harmonized with her melodious voice, and Richard, who hadn't sung Happy Birthday since his own childhood, found himself participating in this imperfect but genuine moment. When they finished, Gabriel and Michael blew out the candles together, and for the first time since the accident, Richard saw his sons make a wish simultaneously, looking at each other as if they shared the same secret desire. "Now it's time for cake," Luna announced, as if she were the host of the party. But as Mrs. Carmen went to get the knife and plates, Richard's phone rang insistently. The name on the display made him frown. Dr. Henry Morgan, chairman of the board at Anderson Pharma. A call from Dr. Morgan on a Saturday could only mean serious trouble. Richard hesitated, looking at his sons who were radiant for the first time in months, then at the phone that continued to ring persistently. Real life was calling, reminding him that there were responsibilities and crises that couldn't be ignored, even in this moment of rare family happiness. He knew that, if he answered that call, the fragile magic of that moment could be broken forever. The phone continued to ring with growing insistence. Richard looked at Gabriel and Michael, who were watching expectantly as Mrs. Carmen returned with the silver knife to cut the cake. Luna had started arranging the small porcelain plates, humming a tune he didn't recognize, but which seemed to float through the air, bringing peace to the previously tense environment. "Dad?" Gabriel called, noticing his hesitation. "Aren't you going to answer?" The simple question carried far more weight than it seemed. For the past 2 years, Richard had always answered the phone, regardless of the time or situation. Family dinners interrupted. Gabriel's physical therapy sessions paused, rare moments of conversation with Michael cut in half. Work always came first, and the boys had learned to accept this reality with a painful resignation. But today, there was something different in Gabriel's gaze. It wasn't just curiosity about whether he would answer. It was a fragile hope that maybe this time they would be more important than any corporate crisis. Richard made a decision that surprised him. He declined the call and put his phone on silent. "Not today," he said, addressing his sons directly. "Today is your day." The smile that lit up Gabriel's face was like the sun breaking through dark clouds. Michael dropped the tense posture he always held when his father's phone rang and approached the table with lighter steps. Luna, who had observed the entire interaction with silent attention, smiled approvingly. "Good job, Mr. Anderson. Birthday parties are sacred." There was a wisdom in the girl's simple statement that made Richard pause for a moment. When was the last time he had considered any family moment sacred? When had he consciously chosen to prioritize presence over productivity? Mrs. Carmen began to cut the cake into generous slices, and Luna immediately offered to hand out the plates. She moved around the table with a naturalness that contrasted with her status as an unexpected guest, as if she instinctively knew where everything should be. "Luna," Michael asked as he accepted his piece of cake, "do you always go to parties for people you don't know?" The question made Luna pause for a moment, holding the plate in mid-air as she considered her answer. "No, not always, but sometimes you just know when someone needs company. Tano, it's like when you're hungry and you can smell something delicious cooking at your neighbor's house." "And how did you smell that we needed company?" Gabriel insisted, genuinely curious. Luna sat in the chair next to him, adjusting her height to be on the same level. "Because when I passed by on the street I saw all the pretty balloons and decorations, but I didn't hear any happy kid noises. And then I thought, either this party hasn't started yet, or something sad is happening." The observation was so accurate that Richard felt a pang in his chest. An 8-year-old child had identified in minutes what had taken him 2 years to admit. His sons were deeply unhappy, and all the structure he had built around them couldn't mask this fundamental reality. "You're really smart," Gabriel commented, speaking more naturally than Richard had seen him in months. "No, I'm not," Luna laughed. "I just pay attention. My mom says paying attention is different from being smart. Anyone can pay attention, but not everyone cares enough to do it." As they ate the cake, which was truly delicious, though none of them had had an appetite for food in recent months, Luna began to tell stories about her life. She talked about her mother, Christina, who worked 3 different jobs to afford the rent on the small apartment where they lived. About how they had moved 5 times in the last 2 years, always looking for cheaper places when one of her mother's jobs ended. "But we're always okay," Luna would add, with an optimism that didn't seem forced. "My mom says home isn't a place, it's a feeling. So wherever we are together, that's our home." Richard watched the girl speak and felt a complex mixture of admiration and embarrassment. Here was a child who had faced far more instability and hardship than Gabriel and Michael would ever experience, yet she radiated a genuine joy and a capacity for connection that his own sons had lost. "And your dad?" Gabriel asked, with the typical frankness of children. Luna hesitated for the first time since she had arrived, and Richard saw a shadow pass over her eyes. He left when I was little. Said he wasn't ready to have a family." The simple answer carried a pain that Luna had clearly learned to bear alone. Michael, who rarely showed empathy, due to his own trauma, reached out and gently touched her arm. "Sometimes I miss my dad too," he murmured, "even though he's here." The observation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Michael's perception of his emotional absence was crystal clear and devastating. He had been physically present, but emotionally distant, lost in guilt and obsessive work. Luna looked at Michael with understanding. "It's hard when the people we love are far away, isn't it? Even when they're close." The phone in Richard's pocket vibrated insistently, another call he ignored. But this time, Gabriel noticed the movement. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "if it's important, you can take it. We understand." The offer broke Richard's heart. His sons had conditioned themselves to accept his absence as inevitable, and now they were graciously offering to release his attention when he had finally decided to give it to them completely. "There's nothing more important than being here with you," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he truly believed those words. Luna clapped her hands softly. "That's beautiful. Now we're a real party." After the cake, she suggested they explore the house. "I bet you guys have places here that nobody else knows about." Gabriel and Michael looked at each other, and Richard realized they were considering revealing something special. Finally, Gabriel took the initiative. "There is one place," he said, "but it's kind of hard to get to. It's in the attic." "I love hard-to-get-to places," Luna declared immediately. "They're always the most interesting." The attic was on the 3rd floor of the mansion, accessible only by a narrow staircase. Obviously, Gabriel couldn't go up in his chair, a fact that had made that space inaccessible to him since the accident. But Luna, with the same naturalness with which she had handled every other aspect of the afternoon, simply asked, "Gabriel, can you get out of your chair?" The direct question, without embarrassment or pity, took everyone by surprise. Gabriel looked at his father, uncertain. "He can move with support," Richard explained carefully, "but we usually don't get out of the chair unless it's necessary for physical therapy." "Oh," Luna said, as if that were useful technical information. Nothing more. "So we can do this. Michael and I will go up first and get everything ready. Then Mr. Anderson can help Gabriel up, and we'll have our secret meeting in the attic." The suggestion was so practical and free of drama that Gabriel immediately agreed. For the first time in 2 years, he was willing to leave the safety of his chair to participate in a social activity. While Michael and Luna ran up to the attic, Richard helped Gabriel position himself for the climb. The boy was nervous but determined, a combination Richard hadn't seen since before the accident. "Dad," Gabriel said as they prepared, "Luna is different from other people." "How so?" "She doesn't stare at my chair like it's the most important thing. About me, it's like she sees just me." The simple observation revealed something profound about how Gabriel had felt perceived by the world for the past 2 years, defined entirely by his disability, reduced to an object of pity or curiosity. Luna had simply treated him like a normal kid who happened to use a wheelchair. The climb to the attic was slow, but not impossible. Gabriel used mostly his arm strength, with Richard offering support when needed. When they finally reached the top, they found Michael and Luna arranging cushions in a circle on the dusty floor. "Welcome to our secret club," Luna announced theatrically. The attic was a forgotten space in the house, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets and boxes of objects no one had touched in years. But Luna had transformed a corner of it into something magical. The cushions formed a cozy circle, and she had found an old lantern that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Now," she said seriously, "every secret club needs rules. What's our first rule going to be?" Michael, who rarely participated in decision-making, timidly raised his hand. "No cell phones." Everyone looked at Richard, who laughed and willingly handed his phone to Luna. "Put away until the meeting is over." "Excellent," Luna approved. "Second rule." "Everyone has to tell one thing that nobody else knows," Gabriel suggested, surprising everyone with his willingness to open up. "And the third rule," Luna added, "is that whatever is said here stays here." Richard found himself sitting on the dusty floor of his own attic, participating in an impromptu secret club with 3 children, and realized he didn't feel ridiculous. For the first time in 2 years, he felt present. But downstairs, the house phone began to ring incessantly. Mrs. Carmen ran up the stairs, her worried expression visible even in the dim light. "Mr. Anderson," she called from the bottom of the stairs, "it's urgent. Dr. Morgan said it's about the company. Something about the medicine you produce. He said, if you don't call back in 15 minutes, he'll have to make decisions on his own." The magical moment shattered like glass. Richard saw the hope drain from Gabriel and Michael's eyes, replaced by familiar resignation. Luna watched the change with silent attention, and he realized she was reading the family dynamic with painful accuracy. He was faced with another choice: stay with his sons in this rare moment of connection, or return to the reality of responsibilities he couldn't ignore indefinitely. But this time, there was a witness to his decision. An 8-year-old girl who had demonstrated in a few hours the kind of presence he had failed to offer in 2 years. And something in Luna's attentive gaze told him that his choice in this moment would define much more than just the rest of the afternoon. Richard remained motionless on the attic floor for long seconds, feeling the weight of another decision that could define the course of his relationship with his sons. The silence that settled was different from the comfortable silence of minutes ago. Now it carried the familiar tension that always arose when work invaded family moments. Luna watched everything with silent attention, and Richard realized she was reading the situation with a disturbingly mature perception. Gabriel had lowered his eyes and started to fidget nervously with his hands, a sign Richard knew well. It was how the boy reacted when preparing for another disappointment. "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Carmen called again from the bottom of the stairs, her voice carrying growing urgency. "Dr. Morgan said he can't wait any longer." "Dad," Gabriel murmured without looking up, "you can go. We understand." The resignation in his 7-year-old son's voice was like a stab wound. Here was a child who had already learned to accept that he would always be the second choice, that special moments would always be interrupted by something more important. But before Richard could respond, Luna stood up abruptly. "You know what I think?" she said with determination. "I think Mr. Anderson should answer that phone really fast, solve the problem once and for all, and then come back to our club. Because," she looked directly at Gabriel and Michael, "when you have that feeling of unfinished business, you can't have fun properly anyway." The suggestion was so pragmatic and devoid of drama that it took everyone by surprise. There was no accusation in Luna's voice, no defeatist resignation. It was simply a practical solution to a real problem. "And in the meantime," she continued, "the boys and I can prepare the second part of our secret meeting. How about that?" Gabriel looked up for the first time, and Richard saw a spark of hope he hadn't noticed before. "You'll wait for him to come back?" "Of course," Luna replied as if the question were obvious. "A birthday party doesn't end just because work shows up." Richard felt something shift inside his chest, a mixture of gratitude and shame. An 8-year-old girl was teaching him how to balance responsibilities without completely abandoning the people he loved. "5 minutes," he promised, addressing his sons directly. "Just 5 minutes and I'll be back." "We'll count," Luna said cheerfully. "If you take longer than 5 minutes, you'll have to pay a forfeit." For the first time in a long time, Richard laughed genuinely. "What kind of forfeit?" "We'll decide when you get back," she replied with a mischievous smile. Richard ran down the stairs, found Mrs. Carmen on the lower floor with the phone in her hands and a worried expression on her face. "Dr. Morgan," he answered quickly. "What's going on?" The chairman's voice came through the line, tense. "Richard, we have a critical situation. We just received a notification from the FDA about Lot 2847B of Millionaire. 3 cases of severe adverse reactions in New York, all hospitalized." Richard's blood ran cold. Millionaire was one of Anderson Pharma's most important drugs, used to treat childhood pneumonia. It was also one of the company's most profitable products, accounting for about 30% of annual revenue. "What kind of reactions?" he asked, already walking toward his office. "Severe respiratory problems, the exact opposite of what the drug is supposed to do. One of the cases is a 6-year-old child who is in critical condition." Richard sat down heavily in his office chair, feeling the weight of responsibility crush any trace of the lightness he had experienced at the party. "What's the protocol?" "The FDA is demanding an immediate recall of all lots produced in the last 3 weeks. We're talking about approximately 200,000 units on the market. And there's more. The press has already gotten wind of it. 60 Minutes is running a story on it tomorrow." Richard's world began to crumble in real time. A recall of this magnitude didn't just mean financial loss. It meant lives at risk, a destroyed reputation, possible criminal charges. And above all, it meant that once again, work had become an emergency that would consume all his attention and energy. "Richard," Dr. Morgan insisted, "I need you here now. The board is already assembled at the office." "I'm on my way," he replied automatically. But then he looked up at the ceiling and remembered the 3 children waiting in the attic. I'll be there in a bit." "This can't wait, Richard. We're talking about the survival of the company. You have 45 minutes to get here, or I'll have to take control of the situation." The threat was clear. If Richard didn't show up immediately, he would lose control of his own company in the biggest crisis of his career. But upstairs, Gabriel and Michael were experiencing their first genuinely happy afternoon in 2 years. "Dr. Morgan," he said slowly, "give me 15 minutes to arrange some things here at home, and then I'll go." 15 minutes, Richard, not a second more." The call ended, and Richard was left alone in the silent office, feeling as if he were being torn in opposite directions. Through the ceiling, he could hear muffled laughter coming from the attic, sounds that hadn't echoed through that house in a long time. Mrs. Carmen appeared at the office door. "Mr. Anderson, the boys are asking if the 5 minutes are up yet." He looked at the clock. Exactly 6 minutes had passed. "Carmen," he said, feeling nauseous, "I have to leave. It's an emergency at the company." Mrs. Carmen's expression hardened. "And the boys?" "I'll explain it to them. They'll understand." "They'll understand," she repeated, in a tone Richard rarely heard. "Mr. Anderson, with all due respect, those boys have spent 2 years understanding. Maybe it's time you stopped asking them to understand and started making different choices." The words hit Richard like a slap in the face. Mrs. Carmen had never spoken to him like that, but she had also never seen Gabriel and Michael as animated as they were that afternoon. "Carmen, you don't understand the gravity of the situation. If I don't go now, I could lose the company. And if I lose the company, how will I support the boys? How will I pay for Gabriel's treatments?" "And if you lose the boys," she retorted, "what good is supporting 2 children who don't trust their own father?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Richard knew she was right, but he also knew he had no choice. The reality was that he had responsibilities that went beyond his personal desires. He walked up the stairs toward the attic with heavy steps, mentally rehearsing how he would explain yet another absence to his sons. When he reached the top of the stairs, he found the 3 children organizing what looked like an elaborate game with objects found in the attic. "Dad," Gabriel exclaimed happily, "Luna invented an amazing game with these old things." Luna had transformed forgotten objects into components of a treasure hunt. Old books became maps, a tarnished mirror became a magic portal, and small porcelain figurines were guardians of ancient secrets. Her creativity had brought new life to the abandoned space. "That's fantastic," Richard forced himself to say, trying to hide the anguish in his voice. "But unfortunately, I have to—" "Daddy," Michael interrupted, using a term of endearment he hadn't used in months, "can you stay just a little longer? The game is at the best part." The plea broke Richard's heart. Michael, who rarely asked for anything, was begging for his presence. Gabriel looked on expectantly, and even Luna seemed genuinely interested in his answer. "Boys," he began, feeling as if he were betraying his own children. "Something very serious happened at work. People could get very sick if I don't solve this right now." "People like my mom?" Luna asked suddenly, her expression changing to something Richard couldn't identify. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" Luna hesitated, as if debating internally whether to reveal something. "My mom has been sick for a few weeks. Pneumonia. The doctor at the clinic gave her some medicine, but she's getting worse. That's why I was alone today. She's in the hospital." Richard's world stopped. "What medicine is she taking?" "I don't remember the name exactly," Luna said, frowning in concentration. "But it's a little blue box with white letters. She takes it every 8 hours. The packaging. Colors matched Pneuma Clear exactly. Richard felt his blood run cold as he realized the terrible possibility that Luna's mother could be among the patients affected by the defective lot. "Luna," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "do you know the name of the hospital where your mom is?" "Metropolitan General," she replied, and something in Richard's expression must have alerted her because her voice grew tense. "Why? Did something happen?" Gabriel and Michael watched the conversation without fully understanding, but sensing that something serious was happening. The playful atmosphere of the attic evaporated instantly. Richard found himself facing the most complex situation of his life. The professional crisis that demanded his immediate presence at the company was directly connected to the life of the mother of the girl who had brought joy back to his sons, and he was potentially responsible for the worsening of her condition. His phone vibrated with a message from Dr. Morgan. 10 minutes left. After that, I take control." But looking at Luna, who now seemed scared, and at Gabriel and Michael, who had finally found a reason to smile, Richard realized that no matter what decision he made, someone he cared about would suffer the consequences. Richard looked at Luna, seeing for the first time since she arrived a real vulnerability in her eyes. The girl who had radiated confidence and joy all afternoon now looked small and scared, as if only now had she allowed her worry for her mother to surface. Mr. Anderson, she said in a trembling voice, my mom is going to be okay, right? The medicine will cure her? The innocent question was like a blade through Richard's chest. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that the medicine meant to save her mother might actually be putting her life at risk? How could he reveal that he, the man she had chosen to trust, was potentially responsible for her mother's worsening condition? Gabriel and Michael watched the interaction with growing concern. Though they didn't fully understand the situation, they sensed that something was terribly wrong. The joy that had filled the attic moments before evaporated, replaced by a dense tension that none of the children could name. Richard's phone vibrated again. Another message from Dr. Morgan. 8 minutes, legal team is arriving. If you're not here, I'll have to make decisions without consulting you. Richard closed, his eyes for a moment, feeling as if he were being torn apart. The company he had built over 15 years was on the brink of collapse, demanding his immediate presence. But here, in this dusty attic, was a girl who might lose her mother because of a product he had personally approved. Luna, he said, making a decision that surprised him, we're going to the hospital now. All of us. Dad? Gabriel questioned, confused. What about the important meeting? This is more important, Richard replied, and for the first time in 2 years he truly believed what he was saying. Mrs. Carmen, he shouted down the stairs, get the car ready. We're going to Metropolitan General Hospital. Luna stood up quickly but hesitated. What if they don't let you in? We're not family. We'll figure that out when we get there, Richard said with determination. He helped Gabriel position himself to get down from the attic, and for the first time, the boy didn't complain about the slow process. The descent was hurried but careful. Michael helped by carrying Gabriel's things, and Luna positioned herself as additional support without being asked. The dynamic between them had changed. They were no longer a stranger and 2 children getting to know each other, but a united group facing a crisis. Mrs. Carmen already had the car ready when they reached the ground floor. The expression on her face showed she understood the gravity of the situation. Metropolitan General, she confirmed. It'll take about 20 minutes with Saturday traffic. During the drive, Richard tried to formulate a plan. First, check on Christina's actual condition and confirm if she was indeed taking the defective Pneumaclear. Second, ensure she received the best available treatment. Third, deal with the personal and professional consequences of his choices. His phone rang insistently. Dr. Morgan again. Richard, where the hell are you? The board is in a total panic. I'm handling a situation related to the crisis, Richard replied, which was technically true. I'll be there as soon as possible. Related how? Richard, you're being very vague. We need total transparency right now. Richard looked at Luna in the back seat, sitting between Gabriel and Michael, holding both their hands as if they had been siblings for years. There's a possibility that one of the people affected by the defective lot is an acquaintance of mine. I need to check on it personally. The answer was met with silence on the other end of the line. Richard, do you understand the legal implications of what you're saying? If there's a personal connection to the victims, that could be interpreted as... Interpreted as what? Richard interrupted, his patience wearing thin. As aggravated negligence. As if you knew about the problem and didn't act appropriately. Richard, please, tell me you didn't know about the defects before the official notification. The implicit accusation hit Richard like a punch. Of course I didn't know. Do you think I would knowingly put people at risk? Then why are you chasing after one specific victim instead of coming here to solve the corporate crisis? The question hung in the air unanswered because Richard didn't have an explanation that made sense from a business perspective. From a human perspective, however, the answer was crystal clear. An 8-year-old child had spent an entire afternoon bringing joy to his sons, and now her mother was in danger because of something he had produced. I'll be there in an hour, he finally said. Richard, if you're not here in 30 minutes, I'm activating the emergency protocol and assuming temporary full control of the company. I have no choice. The call ended and Richard stared at the dead phone, knowing he had just potentially sacrificed 15 years of work. Gabriel, who had overheard part of the conversation, hesitantly touched his father's arm. Dad, if you need to go to work... No, Richard answered firmly. Not today. At the hospital, the situation was worse than Richard had imagined. Christina Miller, 32, was in the ICU in critical condition. The symptoms that should have improved with Pneumoclear had worsened drastically in the last 48 hours. The medical team was baffled by the inexplicable deterioration of a young, previously healthy patient. Dr. Marcus Stevens, the pulmonologist in charge, explained the situation with professional frankness. Mrs. Miller's case is atypical. She was responding well to initial treatment, but since Thursday she has developed severe respiratory complications. It's as if the medication itself is causing the problem it's supposed to solve. Richard felt nauseous hearing the description, which matched the reports he had received about the other cases exactly. Dr. Stevens, the medication she's using, is it possible to check the lot number? The doctor frowned. It is. Why? Is there a specific concern? There is, Richard admitted, feeling the weight of every word. I'm Richard Anderson from Anderson Pharma. We produce Pneumoclear, and we've just discovered that some lots may be causing the exact symptoms Mrs. Miller is presenting. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Stevens stared at Richard, as if trying to process the information, while Luna stood by the ICU window, watching her unconscious mother connected to life support machines. Are you telling me, the doctor said slowly, that the drug we're using to treat pneumonia might actually be causing respiratory failure? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Richard confirmed, feeling as if he were signing his own prison sentence. Dr. Stevens immediately suspended the administration of Pneumoclear and initiated reversal protocols. The change in treatment was urgent, but the damage already done by days of incorrect medication was unpredictable. Luna finally turned away from the window and looked directly at Richard. Her eyes held no accusation or anger, just a deep sadness, far too mature for a child her age. Mr. Anderson, she said in a small voice, did you make the medicine that made my mom sicker? The question struck Richard like lightning. Gabriel and Michael, who had remained silent until then, looked at their father with expressions of shock and confusion. They didn't fully understand the technical implications, but they understood that their father was somehow connected to the suffering of Luna's mother. Luna, Richard began, feeling completely unprepared for this moment. I didn't know there were problems with the medicine. If I had known... But you know now, she interrupted, and there was a disturbing clarity in her voice. And now you can fix it, right? The trust Luna still placed in him, even after discovering he was partly responsible for her mother's condition, was more devastating than any accusation could be. She still believed he could solve everything, that there was a way to fix what was broken. Dr. Stevens returned with preliminary results. The drug's lot number is exactly 2847B, and there's more. We've identified 3 other patients in the hospital using medication from the same lot. We'll need to review all pneumonia cases that received Pneumoclear in the last 15 days. Richard knew that each new case identified exponentially increased his legal and ethical responsibility. But looking at Luna, who was now holding Gabriel's and Michael's hands as if they were her only anchor in the storm, he realized that the legal consequences were the least of his worries. His phone vibrated with a final message from Dr. Morgan. Emergency protocol activated. You are temporarily relieved of executive decisions. Return when you can explain your actions. Richard turned off his phone and put it in his pocket, knowing he had just lost control of the company he had built. But as he looked at Luna waiting by the ICU for her mother, and at Gabriel and Michael, who for the first time in 2 years had shown the capacity to genuinely care for someone else, he realized he might have found something far more important than what he had managed to keep. The question that remained was whether it would be too late to save any of the things that truly mattered. The next few hours at the hospital passed like an eternal vigil. Richard had managed to get authorization for Luna to stay close to her mother, claiming he was responsible for the child's care while Christina was hospitalized. It was a half-truth that had become a reality. Luna truly needed care, and Richard had unexpectedly taken on that responsibility. Gabriel and Michael remained by Luna's side in the waiting room, creating a silent barrier of support around the girl. It was extraordinary to watch how two children who had spent 2 years focused on their own pain could now direct all their emotional energy toward comforting someone else. Dr. Stevens returned periodically with updates on Christina's condition. The suspension of Pneumoclear had stabilized her, but the damage caused by days of incorrect medication could not yet be fully assessed. It was a race against time to reverse the effects of the defective drug before they became irreversible. The next 48 hours will be critical, he explained to Richard during an update at 7 p.m. We've managed to stabilize her respiratory function, but there are signs of lung damage that could be permanent. The word permanent echoed in Richard's mind like a sentence. If Christina developed lasting complications, Luna would have to deal not only with the possible loss of her mother, but with a new reality of constant care, exactly the kind of adult responsibility a child should not have to bear. His phone had rung 17 times in the last 3 hours. Calls from Dr. Morgan, the legal team, journalists who had discovered his connection to the case, and FDA investigators who wanted to speak with him immediately. Richard had ignored them all, keeping his phone on silent while he remained focused on the immediate situation. But at 7:30 p.m., a different call came through. It was from his personal assistant, Maria, with an urgency in her voice that transcended corporate matters. Mr. Anderson, I need to speak with you urgently. It's not about the company. Maria, now is not the time for... It's about the boys, sir. The press has found out where you live. There are at least 15 reporters at the gate of the mansion, and some are specifically asking about Gabriel and Michael. Mrs. Carmen is trying to keep them away, but they're insisting. Richard's blood ran cold. The idea of reporters harassing his children, especially Gabriel in his vulnerable condition, was unbearable, but the boys were here at the hospital with him, which meant... Maria, are you sure they're asking about Gabriel and Michael specifically? Yes, sir. Apparently someone leaked information that you have 2 sons, one with a disability, and that this may have influenced your decisions at the company. They're trying to build a narrative about a conflict of interest or emotional neglect. The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the gut. It wasn't enough that his professional reputation was being destroyed. Now they wanted to drag his children into the center of the controversy, using Gabriel's disability as a sensationalist element. Gabriel, who had overheard part of the conversation, hesitantly touched his father's arm. Dad, do the newsmen want to talk to me? The innocent question broke Richard's heart. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his condition was being exploited by people who didn't know him, who wanted to use his personal story to destroy his family's reputation? No, Gabriel. No one is going to bother you, Richard promised, though he had no idea how he would keep that promise. Luna, who had remained focused on looking toward the ICU, suddenly turned to the group. Mr. Anderson, if the reporters are looking for you, maybe it's better if I stay with someone else. I don't want to cause any more trouble. The offer broke Richard's heart. Even in the midst of her own personal crisis, Luna was trying to protect the family that had taken her in. It was a level of maturity and selflessness that should be impossible in an 8-year-old. Luna, you're not causing trouble, Michael said suddenly, surprising everyone. It was the first time in months he had taken a firm stance on anything. You're our friend. And friends stick together when things get tough. Gabriel nodded vigorously. Michael's right. It doesn't matter what's happening out there. The twins' determination to protect Luna, even as their own privacy was being invaded, revealed a transformation that Richard was only beginning to understand. In a few hours, his sons had developed a capacity for empathy and courage that 2 years of therapy had failed to awaken. But the practical reality of the situation was too complex to be solved by goodwill alone. Richard needed to make difficult decisions, and each choice would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Dr. Stevens returned with a medical update that further complicated the situation. Mr. Anderson, we've identified something concerning in our investigation of the case. Mrs. Miller shouldn't have been using Pneumoclear in the first place. What do you mean? Richard asked, confused. Her medical history indicates a prior allergy to one of the active ingredients. Any doctor should have prescribed an alternative. The fact that she received Pneumoclear suggests negligence in her initial care. regardless of the problems with the defective lot. The information completely changed the dynamic of the situation. If Christina had received inappropriate medication due to medical negligence, Richard and his company were only partially responsible for the worsening of her condition. "Dr. Stevens," Richard said carefully, "does that mean that even a correct lot of Pneumoclear would have caused complications for her?" "Exactly. Her allergy would have caused severe adverse reactions regardless of the drug's quality. The defective lot simply aggravated a situation that was already wrong from the start." Luna had heard the entire conversation, and Richard saw a look of confusion on her face. "Does that mean my mum got sick because of two different mistakes?" The simplicity of the question revealed the absurd complexity of the situation. Christina had been a victim of both medical negligence and a defective product, two systemic failures that had combined to create a critical situation. "Luna," Richard said, sitting down next to her, "it means that several people made mistakes, and your mom paid the price for all of them." The honesty of the answer seemed to be what Luna needed to hear. She nodded slowly, as if processing information far too complex for her age. "So now what?" she asked. It was a simple question with no simple answer. Dr. Stevens would need to investigate the initial medical negligence. Richard would have to deal with the legal consequences of the defective lot. The company was in crisis. The press was hunting for a sensational story. And at the center of it all, an 8-year-old child was waiting to find out if her mother would survive. Richard's phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize, but something compelled him to answer. "Mr. Anderson? This is Dr. Patricia Mendez from the Public Defender's Office. I'm calling about the case of Christina Miller." Richard's stomach clenched. "What kind of case?" "We received an anonymous tip about possible corporate negligence involving defective medication. Normally these cases take weeks to reach our desk, but this one was fast-tracked. I need to speak with you tomorrow morning." "Anonymous tip?" Richard repeated, trying to process the information. "Yes. Someone provided very detailed information about the defective lots, including internal data from your company that shouldn't be publicly available. Mr. Anderson, is there a possibility of an internal leak at Anderson Pharma?" The question hit Richard like a revelation. Someone from inside the company had deliberately leaked confidential information to accelerate a legal investigation against him. It wasn't just a defective product crisis. It was coordinated internal sabotage. "Dr. Mendez," he said slowly, "may I ask what kind of information was provided in this tip?" "Internal quality control reports, emails between executives about production deadlines, and financial data showing pressure to speed up manufacturing. Mr. Anderson, this information suggests that your company may have had prior knowledge of potential problems." Richard hung up the phone, feeling completely lost. Not only was his company in crisis, someone was actively working to destroy him, using internal information to build a devastating legal case. Gabriel hesitantly touched his hand. "Dad, are you okay?" The simple question brought Richard back to the present moment. Here was his son, who had spent 2 years withdrawn and scared, now showing genuine concern for the well-being of others. Michael was comforting Luna, who had finally allowed her repressed tears to flow. "I am," Richard replied, and for the first time in hours he felt he wasn't completely lying, because in the midst of all this destruction, the company in ruins, the shattered reputation, the multiplying legal investigations, something beautiful was happening. His sons were becoming compassionate and brave people. Luna had brought light into their lives, and he had finally made a choice that prioritized people over profit. The price of that choice would be higher than he had ever imagined, but looking at the 3 children united in that difficult moment, Richard realized that maybe it was a price worth paying. The early morning at the hospital brought conflicting news. Dr. Stevens appeared in the waiting room at 6 a.m. with an expression that mixed relief and concern. Christina had been stable through the night, but tests revealed lung damage that would require months of recovery and respiratory therapy. "She's going to be okay," he explained to Luna, who had only managed to sleep for 2 hours, leaning on Gabriel's shoulder. "But she'll need a lot of care and won't be able to work for at least 3 months." The information hit Luna like a devastating revelation. If Christina couldn't work, how would they pay the rent? How would they buy food? The 8-year-old girl who had spent the previous afternoon radiating joy and confidence now faced an adult reality impossible to solve. "Don't worry about that right now," Richard said, noticing the growing panic in her eyes. "We'll figure everything out, Luna. Your only job is to take care of yourself." But as he offered reassurance to Luna, Richard knew his own financial ability to help was rapidly disappearing. During the night, he had received 17 text messages from the company's legal department, each more alarming than the last. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Carmen arrived at the hospital with clean clothes for everyone and a homemade breakfast that none of the children had the appetite to eat. She also brought disturbing news about the situation at home. "Mr. Anderson," she said in a low voice, pulling him away from the children, "the situation out there is worse. The reporters found out about Luna. They're saying you're using a poor child as a shield to look like a victim of your own negligence." The accusation was so absurd that Richard felt true anger for the first time in months. "They're suggesting I orchestrated this situation." "Worse than that," Mrs. Carmen continued. "They're insinuating that you knew Luna before the party, that everything was planned to create a sympathetic narrative when the problems with the medication came to light." Richard looked at Luna, who was trying to teach Michael how to make paper airplanes with materials found in the waiting room, and felt sickened by the malice of the speculation. How could anyone look at that genuine child and imagine she was part of an elaborate manipulation? "There's more," Mrs. Carmen added reluctantly. "Dr. Morgan gave an interview last night. He said you've been emotionally unstable since the boy's accident and that it may have compromised your professional judgment." The betrayal from Dr. Morgan, who had been Richard's mentor for 10 years, was like a knife in the back. Not only was he taking control of the company, he was actively destroying Richard's reputation to justify his actions. Gabriel had overheard part of the conversation and approached hesitantly. "Dad, are people saying you're a bad person?" The innocent question revealed that Gabriel was beginning to understand that his father was being publicly attacked. It was an emotional burden no child should have to carry, worrying about their parents' reputation. "I'm not a bad person, Gabriel," Richard replied, kneeling to be at his son's level. "Sometimes good people make decisions that have bad consequences, even when they're trying to do the right thing. Like when I tried to reach for the fishing rod and ended up falling in the water," Gabriel asked, making a connection that broke Richard's heart. "Exactly like that," Richard confirmed, realizing that Gabriel had been carrying guilt for his own accident for 2 years. "Sometimes bad things happen even when our intentions are good." Michael joined the conversation, positioning himself next to his brother. "And sometimes," he said with surprising maturity, "the bad things make good things happen too, like us meeting Luna." The observation was so perceptive that Richard needed a moment to fully process it. Michael was right. If it weren't for the crisis with the medication, they never would have known Luna existed, never would have experienced the joy she had brought into their lives. At 8:30 a.m., the first real bomb exploded. Dr. Patricia Mendez arrived at the hospital, accompanied by an FDA investigator and a court officer. It was time for Richard to formally face the legal consequences of his decisions. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Mendez said with cool professionalism, "I need to officially notify you that there is an ongoing criminal investigation. You have the right to an attorney, and anything you say can be used against you." The formal words echoed through the waiting room like a sentence. Gabriel and Michael watched with wide eyes, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing the gravity of the situation. Luna stopped playing and quietly moved closer to Richard, as if to offer support. "Dr. Mendez," Richard said calmly, "I am willing to cooperate fully with any investigation, but may I ask the specific nature of the charges?" The FDA investigator, Dr. Charles Fisher, responded with documents in hand. "We have evidence that Anderson Pharma was aware of potential problems in the manufacturing process of Pneumaclear weeks before the distribution of the defective lots." The accusation struck Richard like a bolt of lightning. "That's impossible. I never received any reports indicating manufacturing problems." "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Fisher continued, We have emails dated 3 weeks ago between the production supervisor and the quality control department, discussing irregularities in the process that were deliberately omitted from executive reports. Richard frowned, trying to process the information. What supervisor? What irregularities? If problems were identified, why wasn't I informed? Dr. Mendez exchanged a look with Dr. Fisher before answering. Mr. Anderson, the emails suggest that you were unavailable for consultation on operational matters. There are several references to cancelled meetings and indefinitely postponed decisions. The realization hit Richard like a punch to the gut. In recent weeks, he had been so absorbed in planning the twins' birthday party and dealing with his own emotional issues that he had delegated many operational decisions. He had cancelled meetings, postponed report reviews, trusted that his team would handle minor problems without consulting him. "Are you saying," he asked slowly, "that problems were identified and resolved internally without my approval?" "Exactly," Dr. Fisher confirmed, "and we've now discovered that the solutions implemented by the team actually created the problems that resulted in the defective lots." It was a devastating revelation. Richard had failed not out of malice or greed, but out of emotional negligence. His obsession with protecting his sons and his own instability after the accident had created a leadership vacuum that allowed critical decisions to be made by unqualified people. Luna had listened to the entire conversation, and as the officials prepared to leave the hospital, she approached Richard hesitantly. "Mr. Anderson," she said in a small voice, "does this mean you're going to be arrested?" The innocent question revealed that Luna was trying to process whether she would lose another important adult figure in her life. First, her father had abandoned the family, then her mother had become gravely ill, and now the man who had become her source of security was facing serious legal consequences. "I don't know, Luna," Richard answered honestly, "but even if that happens, we will find a way to take care of you and your mother." Gabriel rolled his chair closer to Luna and took her hand. "And we'll still be friends, no matter what happens." Gabriel's show of loyalty, even as his own family was in crisis, revealed a profound transformation in the boy who had spent 2 years focused only on his own pain. But at 10 a.m., the situation took an unexpected turn. Maria, Richard's assistant, rushed into the hospital, carrying a folder of documents and wearing an expression of extreme urgency. "Mr. Anderson," she said, breathless, "I discovered something very important. I managed to get access to the internal emails that were leaked to the investigation. And, Mr. Anderson, those emails were altered. The dates were changed, conversations were edited to look like they happened weeks ago when they actually happened yesterday, after the problems were discovered." The revelation changed everything. If the emails were fake, the entire narrative of prior negligence collapsed. But it also meant that someone had deliberately fabricated evidence to destroy Richard. "Maria, are you sure about this?" "Absolutely. And there's more. I found out who's behind it. Dr. Morgan is working with a group of international investors who want to buy Anderson Pharma at a bargain price. They needed to destroy your reputation to force a sale. The conspiracy was more elaborate than Richard had imagined. It wasn't just internal sabotage. It was an orchestrated attempt to steal his company by using his own emotional crisis against him. But as Maria explained the details of her discovery, Luna began to cry silently. The entire conversation about investigations and conspiracies was happening next to the ICU where her mother was fighting for her life, and she was absorbing emotional responsibilities that no child should have to bear. Gabriel and Michael immediately positioned themselves beside her, creating a protective circle. It was extraordinary to see how 3 children who barely knew each other had developed such a deep loyalty in the midst of crisis. Richard looked at the 3 united children, then at Maria with the evidence that could save him legally, then at the ICU where Christina was still fighting the consequences of multiple people's mistakes. He was facing the most important choice of his life: use the evidence to clear his name and reclaim his company, or focus completely on caring for the people he had learned to love. But before he could make any decision, Dr. Stevens came running down the hall with an urgent expression that made everyone's heart stop. "Mr. Anderson, Luna, you need to come now. Your mother is awake and asking for you." Luna ran down the hospital corridor with Gabriel and Michael right behind her, followed by Richard. The sound of Gabriel's wheelchair wheels echoed on the floor, but for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't worried about drawing attention. He was just anxious to keep up with his friends at this crucial moment. When they reached the ICU door, Dr. Stevens stopped them gently. "You can go in, but she's still weak. Take it slow." Luna hesitated for a second at the door as if fearing it was a dream. Then she saw Christina sitting up in bed with difficulty but awake and conscious, and all the emotional restraint of the past few days crumbled. She ran into her mother's arms, sobbing with relief. "My baby," Christina murmured in a hoarse voice, hugging Luna as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I'm so sorry I scared you. I thought you were going to... that you wouldn't..." Luna couldn't finish the sentence, but Christina understood perfectly. "I'm here, sweetie, I'm here, and I'm going to be okay." Gabriel and Michael stood respectfully at the entrance of the room, but Luna waved for them to come closer. "Mom, these are my friends, Gabriel and Michael. They took care of me." Christina looked at the twins with deep gratitude. Even in her weakened state, she immediately saw the genuine kindness in the 2 children who had comforted her daughter during the most frightening moment of their lives. "Thank you," she said simply, but her words carried far more weight than they seemed. Richard watched the scene from the doorway, feeling a complex mix of joy for Christina's recovery and guilt for his role in her suffering. When Christina noticed his presence, he braced himself for the justified anger that was sure to come, but instead of accusations, Christina said, "You must be the boy's father. Luna told me how kind you were to her." The lack of resentment in Christina's voice took Richard by surprise. "Mrs. Miller, I need to apologize. My company..." "I know," she interrupted gently. "The doctors explained it to me. But I also know you stayed here all night taking care of my daughter. That means more to me than any unintentional mistake." Christina's grace in the face of such adversity was devastating to Richard. Here was a woman who had nearly lost her life because of failures he should have prevented, yet she chose to focus on the kindness shown rather than seek blame. Dr. Stevens returned with more medical information. "Mrs. Miller, your recovery will take time, but it will be complete. However, as we discussed, you won't be able to work for the next few months." Practical worry immediately returned to Christina's face. As a single mother with no financial reserves, how would she survive 3 months without an income? "About that," Richard said, making a decision that had been maturing over the last few hours. "I'd like to propose something if you'll allow me." Everyone looked at him expectantly. Christina needs time to recover, and Luna needs stability. Gabriel and Michael, well, they've found something special in Luna's friendship. What if you two came to live with us during the recovery? The silence that followed was filled with surprise and contemplation. Luna looked at her mother, then at Gabriel and Michael, then back at Richard. "Live in the mansion?" she asked, as if the idea were too good to be true. "For as long as you want," Richard replied. "We have plenty of space, and honestly, you two have brought something into our lives that we didn't know was missing." Christina hesitated, clearly torn between pride and practical need. "Mr. Anderson, that's a generous offer, but we don't want to be a charity case." "It wouldn't be charity," Gabriel interrupted suddenly. "It would be family." Gabriel's simple statement perfectly summed up what had happened between them. In 24 intense hours, 5 people had formed bonds that transcended circumstances or social obligations. Michael nodded vigorously. "Luna can have the room next to ours, and Mrs. Carmen makes the best chocolate cake in the world." The prospect of having Luna living permanently nearby filled the twins with a joy Richard hadn't seen since before the accident. It was as if she had rekindled a part of their personalities that had been lost. But before Christina could answer, Maria appeared at the door with renewed urgency. "Mr. Anderson, the situation has changed drastically. Dr. Morgan has just been arrested." The news took everyone by surprise. "Arrested?" Richard repeated. "The investigation into the forged emails revealed much more than we imagined. Dr. Morgan wasn't just trying to steal your company. He had been deliberately sabotaging quality control for months to create crises that would force a sale. The revelation was devastating. Are you saying he intentionally caused the problems with Pneumaclear? Exactly. And not only that, we discovered he was selling confidential information about new drugs to competitors. The FBI has taken over the case. It's a crime against public health. Richard felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that his own innocence had been proven. Horror to discover he had trusted someone capable of putting lives at risk for greed. What does this mean for the company? He asked. It means you're completely exonerated. In fact, the investigators are asking you to resume control immediately to stabilize the situation. Gabriel tugged on his father's shirt sleeve. Dad, does that mean you're not going to be arrested? I'm not going to be arrested, Richard confirmed, kneeling to be at his son's level. And it means we can start everything over, the right way. Luna approached hesitantly. Mr. Anderson, what's going to happen to the people who got sick because of the medicine? It was a question that went straight to the heart of the ethical issue. Even though he was legally cleared, Richard knew there were moral responsibilities to be shouldered. We're going to take care of all of them, he promised. Every person affected will receive free treatment and compensation, and we're going to change our company so this never happens again. How? Michael asked, genuinely curious about how complex problems could be solved. Richard thought for a moment before answering. We're going to create a system where real people, like you, participate in decisions about our medicines. Not just doctors and executives, but patients and families who understand what's really at stake. The idea was born in that moment, inspired by Luna's insight and the humanity Gabriel and Michael had shown. Who better to evaluate the real impact of medications than the people who depended on them? Christina, who had been listening to the entire conversation silently, finally spoke. Mr. Anderson, I accept your offer to host us during my recovery, but on one condition. What's that? I want to work at your company when I'm well. Not in an office. I want to work directly with the families who use your medicines. I want to make sure that stories like ours are heard before problems happen. The proposal was perfect. Christina understood both the patient side and the real-world consequences of corporate failures. She would be the ideal bridge between the company and the people it served. Done, Richard said immediately. In fact, I want you to lead an entire department focused on that. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was remarkable. Luna and Christina moved into the mansion, where Luna quickly became an inseparable part of the twins' lives. Gabriel rediscovered his natural joy and began using his artistic skills to create educational materials about medicine for children. Michael developed a passion for organization and started helping Christina catalog patient stories. Anderson Pharma was restructured with full transparency and an advisory board made up of patients and families. The company not only recovered financially, but became a benchmark for corporate responsibility in the pharmaceutical industry. But the most significant change happened on a Sunday morning, 6 months after the birthday party that changed everything. Richard woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden and found Gabriel, Michael, and Luna creating a community garden where neighbors could plant medicinal herbs. Gabriel was in his chair, coordinating the project with infectious enthusiasm. Michael was patiently explaining to adults how to organize the tools. Luna hummed as she planted seeds, radiating the same joy she had brought into their lives on the very first day. "Dad!" Gabriel shouted when he saw Richard approaching. "Come see! We planted lavender to help people sleep better." Richard joined the group, getting his hands dirty in the soil alongside the children. It was the exact opposite of how he had lived for years. Unhurried, no phone ringing, no corporate emergencies. Christina appeared on the porch carrying a tray of homemade lemonade, fully recovered and glowing with health. "Who wants a snack?" she asked. And everyone ran toward the shade. Sitting in a circle in the garden, sharing lemonade and cookies that Luna had learned to make with Mrs. Carmen, Richard looked at the 5 people around him and realized something extraordinary. They had become a real family, not by blood or obligation, but by the conscious choice to care for one another. "You know what's funny?" Luna said suddenly, ever perceptive. "If I hadn't seen the balloons that day, none of this would have happened. And if our friends from school had come to the party, we never would have met you, Michael added. Gabriel laughed. So it's a good thing they didn't come. Richard smiled, remembering the devastating pain of that moment when he realized no one had shown up for his son's party. He now understood that rejection had been necessary to make room for something much better. Sometimes, he said, the best things in life start with the worst moments. Luna nodded wisely. My mum always says that the most beautiful flowers grow after the strongest storms. And there, in that garden full of possibilities, surrounded by people who had chosen to love each other through hardship, Richard finally understood that some of life's greatest riches can't be bought. They can only be cultivated with patience, care, and the courage to let the light in when everything seems dark. The afternoon sun gilded the garden where 5 people had planted not just seeds, but hope. And for the first time in years, the future seemed filled with possibilities as beautiful as they were unexpected.